There was a time when every camera longed for her face, every director fought to have her name on their poster, and nearly every man in Hollywood secretly wished he was the one walking her home. Diane Lane wasn't just beautiful, she was radiant, magnetic, the kind of light that could make a crowded room fall silent the moment she entered. From the pure-hearted country girl to the tormented wife in Unfaithful, Diane carried something rare, the ability to be adored by millions, yet feel achingly alone. But behind the magazine covers, the red carpet smiles, and the critically acclaimed performances was a woman quietly unraveling, loving the wrong people, trusting the wrong hands, choosing the wrong roads, and falling apart, piece by invisible piece. This is the untold story of Diane Lane, of the heartbreaks that left her stunned, the betrayals that never made the headlines, and the resilience that carried her through the kind of darkness most people wouldn't survive. Let's begin. Diane Lane's life didn't begin in love. It began in heartbreak, in the dead chill of a New York winter, on January 22nd, 1965. From the moment she took her first breath, she was caught between two worlds already falling apart. Her mother, Colleen Farrington, was a woman born for the spotlight. A sultry nightclub singer with the kind of face that could stop men mid-sentence, and a past as a Playboy centerfold, Colleen was a beauty with restless eyes, always scanning the horizon for something better, something brighter. She carried the look of someone forever halfway out the door. Her father, Burton Lane, was an entirely different creature. A respected drama coach in New York's off-Broadway world, Burton was known for his ability to coax raw emotion out of even the most hardened actors. He could teach anyone how to feel everything, except, it seemed, himself. A man of ambition, but without stability, Burton spent his days immersed in other people's performances, while his own life quietly crumbled behind closed doors. From the outside, their pairing might have seemed like fate, beauty and passion, talent and ambition. But behind their photographs and late-night parties, their love was brief and brutal, unraveling so quickly, it barely left a trace. Just 2 weeks after Diane's birth, Colleen took her infant daughter and disappeared to Mexico, leaving Burton alone in a cold New York apartment with the memory of a marriage that had collapsed before it had even begun. It was the first of many abandonments for Diane, and it wouldn't be the last. She was barely old enough to form words when she learned that, in her world, nothing was promised and no one stayed for long. While other children drifted to sleep to the sound of bedtime stories and lullabies, Diane's earliest memories were of flickering motel signs glowing red through paper-thin curtains, the steady hum of buzzing neon lights, and ceilings stained with watermarks that mapped out a life already falling apart. Her mother's world was one of dangerous allure, a glittering surface stretched tight over chaos. One night it would be smoky nightclubs filled with laughter, music, and the sweet burn of whiskey. And the next, a stranger's apartment or a cheap motel room with furniture older than the wallpaper. Voices in the next room could turn sharp without warning, cutting through the thin walls like knives. The promise of glamour shimmered around Diane's mother, but it was a cold, brittle kind of beauty, one that dazzled on the surface, but offered no warmth to the little girl watching from the shadows. There were no toys waiting for Diane in those rooms, no birthday parties or photographs hung on the wall. She lived out of suitcases, slept on fold-out couches, and learned early to stay quiet, to listen for the change in a voice before it became dangerous. It was a childhood built not on memories of safety, but on instinct, on watching, waiting, and knowing when to disappear into the background. Diane Lane wasn't born into comfort or security. She was born into survival, a girl who would grow up learning that even the people you love most might one day turn and walk away. It was a childhood forged not in security, but in the flickering shadows between other people's lives. Diane Lane wasn't born into a family. She was born into survival. And from her very first day, it was clear. Her story would not be ordinary. Their marriage lasted barely 2 weeks after Diane's birth. Her mother took her infant daughter and fled to Mexico, chasing distance from a life she no longer wanted, perhaps even from the child in her arms. That was the first of many times Diane would be left behind. Her early years were a carousel of motel rooms, temporary apartments, dressing rooms, and hallways with voices that turned sharp without warning. There were no holidays captured on camera, no cozy bedrooms or family dinners, just motion. Her father eventually won full custody, but that didn't mean stability. They didn't move into a home. They moved into hotel rooms with flickering neon signs and peeling wallpaper. Rooms where the television was the only constant voice, and where young Diane would fall asleep in her coat when there weren't enough blankets. At 6 years old, while other children were learning to tie their shoes, Diane was standing beneath stage lights at the La Mama Theater in New York. Not because someone pushed her there, but because it was the only place where she could exist without vanishing. She didn't act for fame. She acted because, off stage, no one listened. By 13, her life took another sharp turn when her mother kidnapped her, simply deciding it was time for Diane to live with her in Georgia. No middle-of-the-night escape, no dramatic confrontation, just a decision. But Diane wasn't a girl content to let life control her. At just 14, with little more than a plane ticket and the kind of courage most adults never find, she boarded a flight alone, leaving Georgia behind and returning to the only city that had ever felt remotely like home. It wasn't an act of teenage rebellion. It was survival, a desperate, instinctual move from a girl who'd already learned one of life's cruelest lessons, that even the people who bring you into this world can choose to walk away. From that moment on, Diane Lane became fiercely independent. The kind of independence not born from confidence, but from necessity. She learned early that love was unreliable, trust was fragile, and promises were little more than soft words that evaporated when things got hard. Every goodbye left a mark. Every broken vow sharpened her instincts. Her escape from Georgia wasn't an ending. It was the first chapter in the life she would build for herself. A life rooted in one constant: acting. The stage and screen became more than a job. They were sanctuary, a place where she could slip into someone else's skin and, for a brief moment, forget the ache of being unclaimed. Acting was the one place where the world paid attention, where her voice mattered, where feelings weren't punished, but celebrated. It wasn't about fame. It was about being seen, being wanted, being heard. And as Diane threw herself into her craft, she did so with a hunger and intensity far beyond her years. She wasn't chasing stardom. She was chasing a place to exist, to belong. And that desperate, burning need would follow her into every role, every romance, and every heartbreak that came after. She started working professionally at just 6 years old, and by 13, she was starring opposite acting royalty Laurence Olivier in A Little Romance. Critics called her the next Grace Kelly. Her photograph graced the cover of Time magazine. Diane Lane was no longer invisible, but being seen isn't the same as being understood. She became Hollywood's darling, film after film, embodying rebellion, yearning, and aching teenage heartache, touched by love, the outsiders, rumblefish. She was the muse of misfits and the face of a generation. But behind the scenes, Diane was still that young girl curled up in the back seat of a taxi, afraid that love might leave the room while she blinked. The pressure, fame, and the relentless churn of Hollywood eventually caught up with her. Two of her most ambitious projects, Streets of Fire and The Cotton Club, bombed at the box office. At just 19, she was labeled burned out, another pretty face whose moment had passed. So she disappeared, not out of bitterness, but exhaustion. She moved to Georgia, ironically, the very place her mother had once kidnapped her to. No cameras, no scripts, no applause, just silent. What happened during those years is known only to her. But when she returned, she was different. Diane Lane's comeback wasn't a headline-grabbing redemption story. It was quiet, intentional. She took roles not to win hearts, but to tell the truth. Lady Beware, The Big Town, and most pivotally, Lonesome Dove, which earned her an Emmy nomination. Offers came for blockbuster parts, including the lead in Pretty Woman. She turned it down. She wasn't chasing validation anymore. She'd had enough of diamond necklaces and glittering gowns that left her lonelier than ever after the flashbulbs dimmed. By the late 90s, Diane was playing characters who reflected the complexity of her own inner world. A Walk on the Moon showed a woman breaking the rules and grieving her own choices. Critics called her performance meltingly effective. But for Diane, it wasn't about reviews anymore. It was about honesty. Then came Unfaithful in 2002, the role that would cement her legacy. Her portrayal of a woman consumed by guilt and desire was so raw and so devastatingly real that audiences assumed the pain had to come from her own life. It earned her an Academy Award nomination and launched endless rumors about what or who inspired such aching performances. The truth was, Diane Lane had been carrying those wounds long before the cameras rolled. Diane Lane's love life has long been a favorite subject of Hollywood whispers. Her first marriage was to actor Christopher Lambert, whom she met promoting the Cotton Club. He wasn't enamored with the spotlight surrounding her. He was drawn to the quiet girl behind it. In 1988, they married in a modest ceremony in New Mexico. For a while, it felt like everything Diane had longed for: a home, a family, a husband who stayed. In 1993, they welcomed a daughter, Eleanor, but the fairy tale unraveled. Their marriage slowly eroded, not through scandal, but through quiet disconnection. Mornings with fewer words, evenings with growing silence. Hearts that used to race now barely move. By 1994, it was over. Diane never spoke ill of Christopher. The heartbreak wasn't about betrayal. It was about what they couldn't be. Then came actor Josh Brolin, a rugged, charismatic man who seemed to offer the peace she craved. They married in 2004. 4 months later, she called the police. Josh was arrested for alleged domestic battery. The charge was dropped. Their publicists called it a misunderstanding. But for Diane, who had survived a childhood of instability and had spent her life holding her breath, that night changed everything. She stayed. Not because it was okay, but because she didn't want to be the woman who failed again, who couldn't hold a marriage together, who wasn't enough for love to stay gentle. They divorced in 2013. Diane has never remarried, not because she gave up on love, but because she refused to make excuses for pain. Beyond her 2 marriages, Diane Lane's love life has been a string of whispered names and quiet departures. There was Christopher Atkins during The Outsiders, a boyish, innocent kind of romance that unfolded in the small, in-between moments on set. They were both young, both navigating the dizzying chaos of early fame, and in each other, they found a brief, sweet escape. It wasn't the kind of love built to last, but it didn't need to be. It was a flicker of light in a life that, until then, had known mostly shadow. Diane would later look back on it with a quiet fondness, one of the rare memories untouched by scandal or regret. Then came Emilio Estevez, charismatic, wild, and impulsive. Their connection was instant, the kind of chemistry that crackled between takes and lingered after the cameras stopped. It was brief, intense, and fizzled before it could fall apart, which in a way made it easier to remember fondly. There was no betrayal, no bitterness, just 2 young hearts trying to outrun the Hollywood machine. Matt Dillon followed, the bad boy of the 80s, with eyes that held a mystery Diane could never quite unravel. Their romance was turbulent, complicated by the rising heat of their careers and the suffocating noise of public attention. It was a relationship built on equal parts attraction and unspoken tension. It burned hot and fast, then vanished like smoke, leaving only lessons behind. Director Danny Cannon entered her life during Judge Dredd, a connection forged not in the spotlight, but in the quiet, exhausted hours behind the scene. Their relationship was discreet, mostly invisible to the tabloid. It was fleeting, But for a woman so often defined by public affairs, the privacy itself made it meaningful. And then there was Nicholas Cage, a friendship that quietly, briefly tipped into something more. From Rumble Fish to the family man, their connection was rooted in mutual respect, creative hunger, and the rare comfort of being fully understood without explanation. Rock legend John Bon Jovi, too. A few months in 1985, a wildfire romance that mattered, even if it didn't last. And then there was Richard Gere. Their on-screen chemistry in Unfaithful was electric, so palpable that audiences were convinced there had to be something real. Diane denied it with grace, describing their bond as one of mutual respect and a rare, wordless understanding. They had, after all, first met on the Cotton Club in 1984. Fans desperately wanted the fiction to bleed into reality. It never did. Diane Lane has lived a life most would struggle to survive. A childhood of instability, a career filled with relentless scrutiny, heartbreaks that didn't make headlines, betrayals she never named, and through it all, she endured. She stopped letting Hollywood script her love life, stopped chasing fairy tales. Today, at 60, Diane Lane lives quietly in Los Angeles. No tabloid scandal, no red carpet romance, just gardens, books, and the kind of stillness that once terrified her. She remains close to her daughter, Eleanor. Their bond is deep and enduring, forged not just in love, but in survival. Professionally, Diane Lane still graces the screen, but now entirely on her terms. No longer chasing leading lady roles designed to flatter or dazzle. She gravitates toward characters with depth, with scars, with history written behind their eyes. In an industry obsessed with youth and noise, Diane has mastered the art of quiet, devastating presence. She works when she chooses, in roles that mean something, in stories that matter. In recent years, she lent her voice to Pixar's Inside Out 2, returning as the warm, steady mother figure, a character far from the glamorous ingenue of her youth, but no less important. It was a reflection of where she is now, grounded, wise, and content to be the steady heartbeat of a story, rather than its glittering centerpiece. On screen, she took on the role of Slim Keith in Feud, Capote versus the Swan, a woman known in 1960s high society for her elegance, restraint, and the sharp steel beneath her polished exterior. It was a performance layered with poise, vulnerability, and that same quiet strength Diane has always carried in real life. These days, she gravitates toward roles that tell the truth about womanhood, about grief, resilience, and the ache of outliving old versions of yourself. She no longer needs applause to validate her. Diane Lane reminds audiences that true power isn't in shouting the loudest, but in knowing when to remain silent, when to walk away, and when to claim peace as your own. In a world that's constantly watching, she's learned the greatest rebellion is sometimes to be unseen, and to thrive anyway. She no longer lives for the camera. She lives for herself, not because she was perfect, not because she courted scandal or headline, but because she was flawed, because she was human, because she dared to love, to lose, and to keep standing long after the world stopped watching.